All of us remember the horrible events of September the 11th and the grief and the pain that so many people went through in New York. 3,000 roughly people lost their lives. Obviously, the family members have not forgotten that, and the nation hasn't forgotten their loss either. The senator from New York, Senator Schumer, and I have introduced legislation called the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. This is bipartisan legislation that would enable Americans and their family members who lost loved ones on that horrible day to pursue their claims for justice against those who sponsored these acts of terrorism on U.S. homeland. This bill was reported out of the Senate Judiciary Committee without objection, and similar legislation has passed the Senate unanimously last Congress. That kind of unanimous support, I believe, sends a clear message that we will combat terrorism with every tool we have available, and that the victims of terrorist attacks in our country should have every means at their disposal to seek justice. I'm grateful for the work of the senator from New York, Senator Schumer, in introducing this bill along with me, Chairman Grassley for shepherding it through the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I appreciate the support of a large bipartisan group of like-minded senators in this chamber. We've worked with a number of senators, including Senator from Alabama, Senator from South Carolina, who expressed concerns about earlier versions of the legislation, and I appreciate their willingness to work with us to deal with their concerns in a way that now has gained their support. I would say that this legislation amends the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act that was passed in 1976. So we already have a piece of legislation on the books that waives sovereign immunity under some circumstances, but the problem is it does not extend to terrorist attacks on our homeland by countries and organizations that have not already been designated as state sponsors of terrorism. So what this does is make some small changes in that legislation that first passed in 1976 to expand the scope of that to allow the families of the 9/11 tragedy to seek justice in our courts of law. Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that a colloquy between myself and Senator Schumer be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. I would add, Mr. President, that already there's litigation pending by the families that lost loved ones on 9/11, and right now there appears to be somewhat of a split in the courts, in the federal courts, with regard to the scope of sovereign immunity and whether it applies. But this legislation would basically clarify that, both for the pending cases and for future claims. And at this point, I would defer to my friend, Senator from New York, for any statement he'd care to make, and then I'll be happy to offer a unanimous consent request.
Thank you. I thank my good friend from Texas for yielding and for the great job he has done. This is another example of bipartisan legislation, and in fact, another example of a Cornyn-Schumer collaboration, which works pretty well around here. We've introduced this bill, Senator Cornyn and I, for the last 3 Congresses, and first under the leadership of Senator Leahy, then under Senator Grassley. It has twice passed without objection through the Senate Judiciary Committee, once by the full Senate, and so I want to thank both Senators Leahy and Grassley for their help as well. The bill is very near and dear to my heart as a New Yorker, because it would allow the victims of 9/11 to pursue some small measure of justice by giving them a legal avenue to hold foreign sponsors of terrorism accountable for their actions. The courts in New York have dismissed the 9/11 victims' claims against certain foreign entities alleged to have helped fund the 9/11 attacks. These courts are following what we believe is a nonsensical reading of the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. So for the sake of the families, I want to make clear beyond a shadow of a doubt that every entity, including foreign states, will be held accountable if they are found to be sponsors of the heinous act of 9/11. My friend, the senior senator from Texas, and I have worked hard to narrow the bill, to strike the proper balance between our interests abroad and the rights of our citizens to obtain redress when they're victims of terrible wrongdoing. We will submit a colloquy for the record that goes into more detail on some of the legal nitty-gritty here. But we cannot lose sight of the bigger picture. What this legislation means to the victims of 9/11 transcends day-to-day politics. One of the most impassioned advocates of this bill is Ms. Terry Strada, seeking justice for her husband, Tom. Tom lost his life in the North Tower on September 11th. Terry didn't just lose a husband. She lost a father to a young son of 7, a daughter of 4, and a tiny baby boy who was born shortly after the towers fell. She lost a loving father and her best friend. Terry Strada and many others are seeking what we would all be compelled to seek if we suffered such a loss at the hands of hate and evil, which is simply justice. The fact that some foreign governments may have aided and abetted terrorism is infuriating to the families if justice is not done. That's what they seek: justice, justice, justice. Terry and her 3 children have championed this bill for over a decade. They are not cursing the darkness, as would be human nature to do, at their terrible, unjust, and almost inexplicable loss. But instead, her family and many other families have chosen to light candles, to do whatever they can to make sure this never happens again, so that any foreign entity that would seek to choose to help and aid and abet and do terrorism here on our shores will pay a price if it is proven that they have done so. So Terry and the other families are lighting a candle, a saintly act. I thank them, all the other families as well: Monica Gabriel, Mindy Kleinberg, Lori Van Auken, Kristen Brittwieser, Patty Casaza, for their tireless advocacy and patience. In conclusion, Mr. President, JASTA is long overdue, a responsible, balanced fix to a law that has extended too large a shield to foreign actors who finance and enable terrorism on a massive scale. The victims of 9/11 and other terrorist attacks have suffered such pain and heartache, but they certainly should not be denied justice. Now I yield back to my colleague from Texas for the unanimous consent request.
Mr. President.
Majority Whip.
Mr. President, I thank my colleague from New York for his comments and for his partnership working on this important legislation. I now ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 362 and S2040.
Clerk will report.
Calendar number 362, S2040, a bill to deter terrorism, provide justice for victims, and for other purposes.
Is there objection to proceed to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I ask consent that the committee reported substitute be withdrawn and the Cornyn substitute amendment be agreed to. The bill as amended be read a third time.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, I know of no further debate on the measure.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill as amended is passed.
Mr. President, I ask consent that the motions to reconsider be considered and be laid on the table.